Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Vogel. I'm speaking on behalf of Amy Snover, the Director of the Climate Impacts Group and the co-lead PI of this Northwest RISA program. Amy sends her regrets that she can't be here to speak with you all today. I'll present the first several slides and then I'll hand the mic off to Jennifer Allen, who's our social science co-lead PI for the Northwest Climate Resilience Collaborative. First, we'd just like to recognize the incredible project team that contributed to the vision of the Northwest Climate Resilience Collaborative. A lot of folks put an incredible amount of creative energy into envisioning a new way to do climate services with and for frontline communities. And the folks across these great institutions deserve much of the credit for what Jennifer and I will present today. But Jennifer and I will reserve the blame for any shortcomings in trying to summarize this collective vision in 20 minutes. The Northwest Climate Resilience Collaborative is an effort to reorient public investment in climate resilience research and practice towards the challenges facing frontline communities. We here at the Climate Impacts Group have been co-producing science-based evidence around climate change with decision makers for 25 years as of this year. But quite honestly, very little of our work has addressed the plight of those most affected by climate change. There's a little bit in there, but the focus on working with decision makers and in effect has left a lot of people out of the picture. And that's why our goal is to both ask and answer this central question. How can science-based evidence assist frontline communities in improving their resilience to climate change while addressing the legacy of systemic inequity that continues to influence their lives and livelihoods? We're going to be referring to frontline communities throughout this talk, and some of these words I feel can get overused and underexplained. Our intention is to use this phrase very thoughtfully, and I'm just going to provide our working definition. Frontline communities are those that will be disproportionately impacted by climate change. These are the populations that face historic and current inequities, often experience the earliest and most acute impacts of climate change, and have limited resources and or capacity to adapt. And I think the first thing that occurs to a lot of people when we talk about frontline communities are communities of color, specifically the BIPOC communities, and we're certainly focusing on them. But we also want to point out that there are other frontline communities that we need to be concerned about, so that are, whose lives and livelihoods are dependent upon natural resources and climate-sensitive resources. So our program of work, we're focusing specifically on tribes and indigenous peoples, people of color, both in urban and rural areas, but also the communities dependent upon natural resources for their livelihoods and the economically disadvantaged. So sort of the question I think that we want to answer for you, even if you're not asking it of yourself yet, is why center frontline communities? Climate change is a fundamentally human problem, especially building resilience to the impacts of climate change. And thus progress on resilience really requires centering those that are most in need. Many frontline communities are more exposed to climate hazards due to where they live and work. They're more sensitive to the regional and local consequences of climate change, and these populations often have relatively lower adaptive capacity along all sorts of metrics like poverty rates, community wealth, institutional capacity, the quality of their existing infrastructure. Frontline communities also, they don't just face the impacts of climate change. Climate change is something that compounds the effects of other stressors like poverty, marginalization, lack of economic opportunity, interacting health impacts. It's really important to keep that in mind as well. Organizations like the Climate Impacts Group, the RISA program as a whole, and even NOAA itself, have historically underserved frontline communities, and as a result, we don't yet know how to work with them really productively. It's something we hope to learn how to do better through this collaborative. And climate services have also done an inadequate job of integrating different ways of knowing into practice of adaptation, including traditional ecological knowledge or farmers' understanding of natural climate cycles and departures from them. And really at the core of centering frontline communities is an acknowledgement that those communities themselves have to be central to identifying the problems that they want to focus on and also devising the solutions to those problems for us to really make progress on adaptation. And we as researchers, we need to play a supporting role in that effort. So here we've got, I guess the question is, how do we center frontline communities in this collaborative? And this is a simple diagram illustrating our functional components of our program and the dedicated support staff that are going to focus on it. The first way we're doing this is organizations and individuals that represent frontline communities are holding leadership roles, both on the leadership team, which is a group of 5 people, 2 of whom are members of community-facing NGOs that represent communities of color and tribes, and they're going to, provide leadership from that level on the priorities of the overall research program. But then also within each of those 3 functional programs of work that are highlighted, there's a research PI, principal investigator, for each of those 3 areas, but there's also a co-equal role for a community-based principal investigator. And we're sharing that concept of principal investigator, not just with academic researchers, but people who have an expertise that is really important to understanding how to interact with frontline communities that may not be in an academic institution or may not hold a PhD. Second, just in these 3 programs of work, they will be, the portfolios themselves will be driven by community-defined needs and values, not a preconceived notion of what resilience means to us as researchers, and that's where having those co-PIs, in addition to academic researchers, plays an important role in determining what exactly it is we're going to do. Third, we have this, the collaborative's Frontline Community Committee. We can think of it as sort of an advisory board, but it was really envisioned with our community-facing NGO partners as a forum to empower the communities we're going to work with. So these are frontline communities themselves, so they can meet together, assess what's going well and what's not in the collaborative, and make advice, and recommendations to the leadership team and to each of those portfolios. And really, the idea here was to create a safe space where, there's not going to be an intimidating presence of a lot of white faces or a lot of PhDs trying to kind of dominate the conversation. The idea here is to create a space for them to discuss amongst themselves and provide direction to the overall program of work. Fourth here, another way that we're centering frontline communities is that we're resourcing those communities themselves. Because frontline communities, they often just don't have the time or resources to engage in climate resilience work, something that many of us have encountered. We intend to help to resource those communities through our Scaling Resilience portfolio, in part through a small grants program, the provision of interns that can work with those communities and other kinds of staff support, and a whole bunch of other ideas that are under development on how to build community capacity. And that's both through that scaling research and engagement portfolio, but also through our own staff support in our own organizations, where we will kind of staff those people to our partners as needed to help them do things like fill out a small grant application, or to report back on those grants, things that are really hard to do if you just don't have a lot of time. And finally, we created this new senior research position at the Climate Impacts Group, who's going to work across all of the frontline communities that we're engaging with through this program, and also all of the various research agendas. And we've asked this person to have one foot firmly in the academic research community, but to very explicitly have that other foot on the ground, helping with the practical work of getting things done at the community level. The Resilience Collaborative is a regional effort of the 10 community, nonprofit, and academic entities you see listed here. Note that we've brought together a team of academic researchers, those are the blue dots and blue names, as well as community-facing organizations and nonprofits, those are the green dots and green names. And we also have a broader group of partners who are not part of the core research team, but with whom we intend to work closely. And of course, it's important to note that the intention for this project team that's illustrated here is to work directly with frontline communities. And that's, as of today, 5 rural communities over multiple years, farm workers in the Yakima Valley, and 10 to 25 tribal coastal communities across Oregon and Washington. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer to continue the conversation.
Thanks, Jason. I'm Jennifer Allen from Portland State University and very excited to be part of this project. So next we're going to turn to delving a little bit more into what we're actually going to do in the 3 portfolios, the tribal coastal resilience, rural resilience, and scaling resilience, as well as the evaluation component of this project. And I won't go into great detail, but I'll cover some of the key goals and activities, and we'd be glad to delve in more during the Q&A. Next slide. So the tribal coastal resilience element of this program has 2 main goals. The first goal is to focus on tribal climate readiness, and that involves conducting a comprehensive assessment of climate readiness as well as the barriers to adaptation in the tribes. That will be focused on mainly in the first 2 years of the project. And then the second goal is to catalyze implementation of adaptation actions by addressing priority barriers and needs of coastal tribes, drawing on what we learn from that assessment, and that would build on that during the following years of the program in years 3 through 5. And the intention is to work collaboratively across probably as many of the 25 coastal tribes in Oregon as Washington as we can over the course of this to advance the implementation of vulnerability reduction measures in those communities. Next slide. In the rural resilience portfolio, again, the two main goals are to increase capacity in 5 rural communities by learning more about community values and vision, more about the sensitivity of the systems in these communities, and really examining and understanding the economic levers of change that can be deployed to help these communities become more resilient. And the second goal is to improve understanding of climate change impacts, specifically on farm workers in the specialty crop industry, identifying opportunities to prepare for climate impacts and working with them to co-develop a roadmap for advancing climate resilience in these communities. Next slide. In the third portfolio, scaling resilience. This really focuses on both scaling out and understanding ways that the things that we are learning can be shared with other communities in the region, as well as scaling up to take the information that we're gathering and the knowledge that we're developing to explore how it can be used to inform laws and policies that shape many communities, as well as scaling deep to increase social and community capital in these communities. So in terms of scaling up, again, the opportunity is to share resilience content with broader constituencies related to the rural and the tribal portfolio, as well as to develop a help support system to help share and support peer-to-peer networking and developing curricula, case studies, and knowledge resources that can be shared across communities. In terms of scaling up, again, understanding what we're learning on the ground and then working with our community partners and co-PIs to figure out the best and most effective way to relay this information in ways that can really affect broader policies and strategies. And scaling deep, Jason already mentioned the staffing support that we want to provide. So in this element, we'll be doing things such as helping place students in the communities we're working with, and developing other tangible resources, reports, plans, guidance that can really help them engage with their communities and go deep in terms of really advancing their resilience activities in their places. Next slide. And then the evaluation component is a formative evaluation strategy. So it will be ongoing throughout the project, starting very much in the very first moments, in order to help us understand how we are, the processes that we are using, really ensuring equity and power sharing in the way we are approaching the development of our research agenda, the further development of the strategies I just briefly touched on in the other portfolios, to support advancing the climate justice agenda and really assessing how well are we doing, what needs to be adapted, as well as measuring conventional project objectives. You know, are we succeeding in achieving the goals that we have set out to do in this RISA? And again, it's an interactive approach intended to assess and manage progress and really ensure that procedural justice and equity is being integrated throughout what we do. And we see this as a really core element of the project in order for us to be able to gather lessons learned, adapt as needed, and really ensure that we are staying focused on centering our frontline communities and our community partners in what we're doing as we advance this project going forward. I believe next slide, maybe time for, yeah, so just a reminder, again, of what the overarching focus of this RISA is. How can science-based evidence assist frontline communities in improving their resilience while addressing the legacy of systemic inequity? And so, again, the different elements of this RISA are intended to really drive toward answering this question, and the formative evaluation piece will ensure that we are learning and adapting as we go and staying focused, again, on centering our frontline communities. And we're open for questions, as I guess we'll join the other panelists, perhaps for a Q&A session. So thanks so much.